Dear student, welcome to this session. In this lesson, we have to discuss about the important area in psychology called learning. Learning plays an important role in almost all the areas of psychology. We know that learning is the inherent aspect of the human behavior, and we adopt various modes and methods for our learning. See that psychologists are interested in studying about the learning for various reasons. For example, if we take the general psychologist, he may be wondered to know what happens when the individual perceives about something in the day-to-day situation and what we infer from the situation. If we take a developmental psychologist, he may be interested to know how the children differentiate the mother from the other people. If you take the clinical psychologist, he may be interested to know why many people feared about mice and spiders. See, the important thing is we least bother about the human beings, but feared about the mice and spiders. This is very important to notice. But whatever the question may be, you can get the answer only from learning. In other words, you can provide explanation for all these things only on the basis of the learning. So, it is important to note down that learning plays the predominant role in all the areas of psychology. First, let us see the meaning for learning. See, many psychologists have proposed many definitions for learning, but most of the psychologists have accepted with the following definition. That is, learning refers to a more or less relatively permanent change in behavior brought about by experience or practice. Again, remember, learning refers to a more or less relatively permanent change in behavior brought about by experience or practice. From this definition, you can discuss three important aspects or qualities of learning. Again, from this definition, you can infer three important aspects or qualities of learning. The first meaning is, learning means there should be a desirable modification. In other words, learning means there should be a modification of behavior. See, modification means we should take the modification only in the desirable direction or in the constructive manner. Then the second meaning from the definition is, the change brought about by learning should be relatively permanent. Relatively permanent means when you compare your present performance with the previous performance, there should be an improvement. There should be an improvement, and the improvement should be there for a long period of time. Otherwise, it becomes simply acting, because we know how to act according to the demands of the environment or expectation of the other people. Once if we get the modification of behavior, or once if we acquire the modification, we should know how to keep the modification for a relatively over a period of time. And the third point from this definition is, we can learn through experience or practice. Even in the normal life, we used to mention that experience is the best teacher. So out of the experience we can learn. And the other meaning is, practice, through practice we can learn. That's why we used to say that practice makes man perfect. Again, remember, no one is perfect in the world. Even the perfection is the relative term. But here we mean the practice and perfection in terms of relative components. For example, we are moving always towards perfection, because no one is perfect. If at all you are stating that you are the perfect person in the world, you are the first person should be admitted in the mental hospital. No one is perfect in the world. We are always moving toward the perfection, for which we are trying to attain a level of standard, or a level or standard. That standard is very important in our life. So this definition gives us some idea about learning. One is, learning means we can learn through practice or through experience we learn. Then learning means there should be a modification in behavior that should be in the desirable direction. Then the third important component of this definition is, once if you acquire the modification, you should know how to persist with this modification of behavior. This is very, very important in the case of learning. So each and every one in our day-to-day life, learn something. We learn something, but what is the quality of the learning? how can you infer about the learning? Whether is it possible for you to measure this individual has learnt today 5 kgs? In psychology, the so and so has learnt about 3 kgs. Today this individual has learnt about 5 kilometers or 5 meters. So it's very difficult to measure the learning as intact. One more thing, learning is the qualitative entity. You can't quantify the learning. So learning can be inferred through its indicators. One of the indicators of learning is performance. So we should understand the relationship between the learning and the performance. Again remember, if there is a better performance, which indicates that there is the presence of the learning. But poor learning or poor performance doesn't indicate that there is absence of learning, because you can't forget each and everything you have learned from your life. See, if at all you are getting success, you can infer the success for the effort you have made. If at all you got the failure, then you can infer failure for the lack of effort, and you can't say that learning is not presented in that situation. That is why the relationship between the learning and performance becomes so critical. But still, we should accept that better performance is the indicator of learning. One more thing, even from the example you can understand the relationship between the learning and performance. For example, if Leander Paes performs very well in the particular tennis match, you can say that out of the practice he has performed very well, or out of his experience he has performed very well. But if at all due to the fatigue or tiredness he has failed or poorly performed in a particular match, you can't say that he didn't learn tennis at all. I hope that you can understand the difference between these 2 points. See, when he performs in a better manner, you know that due to the practice or experience he has performed well. But if at all he has poorly performed in a particular match, immediately you can't say that he never learns tennis at all. So the relationship between the learning and performance becomes very, very crucial. But one more important thing is the maturation is essential for the better learning. Again remember, maturation is not learning. Maturation, the simple meaning of the maturation is the biological unfolding of the organism. The simple biological unfolding of the organism doesn't treat it as learning or called as learning. But the maturation is essential for the better performance. In other words, in the same Leander Paes example, see, when he grows more and more, or when he becomes older, then automatically he is getting more muscular strength, more physical energy, out of which he may perform very well. So maturation is related to learning, and mere maturation is not learning. So we can discriminate the learning from performance, but performance is the best indicator of the learning. Even in our day-to-day life, we have many indicators of our learning through which we can infer the quality of learning of an individual. Psychologists have discussed about the process of learning. The process of learning involves many things. It teaches many things for the individual in the day-to-day life. For example, learning is the goal-directed behavior. In other words, learning helps the organism to adopt new responses. So which is nothing but a kind of goal-directed behavior. Just for attaining some satisfaction, just for attaining something in the life, we are working towards the life, we are moving towards the life, and we put all of our effort to achieve something. That is called as goal-directed behavior. See, goal means immediately don't assume that everywhere we should set the goal as like I want to attain immediately the MSc Applied Psychology with gold medal. Okay? See, it is also a goal, but your goal should be realistic. Whenever you are setting your goal, you should first think about your own capacities, own capabilities, and accordingly you should set the goals. For example, without assessing your capacities when you set the goal, most probably it will be an unrealistic goal, and probably you cannot attain your unrealistic goal, and normally you will put the effort to the others and you won't accept that you have committed mistake. Normally people, those who set the unrealistic goal, they are always attributing their success to their luck and their failure to the other people. For example, even you can have the feeling that the teacher doesn't know how to correct my answer script. See, if at all you have failed in the examination, or if at all you got very poor mark in the examination, normally we should rationalize these things with our parents. Yes, of course it's true, because the teachers are incapable of correcting your own stories in the examination hall. That's what you are doing in the examination hall. So if you write your own stories, how can you expect the teacher to understand your own stories and correct the own stories? Teachers in the examination now, they can give the marks only for the answers for a particular question. So you can understand that learning is the goal-directed behavior in which we are trying to attain some standard of excellence, which is very, very essential in the part of learning. In other words, learning is goal-directed and helps the organism to adapt new responses. Further, learning enables the organism to make effective responses to life situation. Just think about your behavior in the day-to-day life. See, you are always notifying or you are always observing the other people's behavior. According to the expectation of the others, you are exhibiting the behavior. In other words, you become very, very critical in your evaluation, particularly when evaluating the others, not evaluating ourselves. See, if you are really critical when you are evaluating yourself, that's fine. But we are critical in evaluating the other people, but we are taking it in the different sense, and we know how to exhibit the adaptive responses. For example, as a social animal, because you know that man is a social animal. As a social animal, we know how to exhibit the behavior in the society, and we know that our behavior should be accepted by the other members in the society. In other words, you will be sacked out from your own society. In other words, you will be alienated from your own society, for which learning helps us to understand the expectations of the others in the society, and at the same time learning helps us to produce the adaptive responses according to the demands or expectations of the others. Then the third important process in the learning is it helps us to change our own behavior. See, we know the important word change. You should know one thing, change is the word so far not changing. Okay, all the other things are changing in the changing world. In other words, we are experiencing a drastic change in the day-to-day life. So we must have the openness to accept the changes in the life. So learning helps us to change one's own behavior. Then moreover, learning helps the organism to achieve a specific goal by establishing a new stimulus response relationship. In other words, we learned how to behave in a particular manner in the particular situation. For example, if you are working in your office, see, immediately you are trying to infer the mood of your superior, and accordingly you are behaving in that situation. You want to get a leave from your superior. First you are sensing the mood of the superior, then accordingly you are opening the topic. For example, if the superior is in the aggressive mood, normally we won't ask the leave at all. Then what we do is, we will go back to our place, and then the next day we will make a telephone call and we will convey that I am suffered with this disease. Even we are trying to understand the mood and attitude of the other person, and accordingly we behave. See, this is the important area which is covered in your social psychology. If you take the social psychology, we are talking about the behavior of the individual in a social situation. This is the basic difference between the sociology and social psychology. In the social psychology, we are talking about the individual behavior. We are studying about the individual behavior in the group situation. Even learning lay the foundation stone for this type of behavior and study about this type of behavior. See, only when you understand the relationship between yourself and the others in the environment, you can get the real meaning out of the situation. Then you can effectively deal with the other people in the situation. Hence, learning helps us to achieve goals by understanding the other person, or learning helps us to maintain a new stimulus response according to the relationship expected by the other person. So the process of learning becomes pivotal construct in the human being. Then next important component of the learning is its characteristics. If you take the characteristics of learning, the first characteristic is, it is the continuous process. Learning is the continuous process. Don't assume that getting this MSc Applied Psychology degree or getting the MPhil Applied Psychology is your learning. It is a continuous process. From birth to death we learn. For example, immediately after birth, the child has to cry. Otherwise the parents have started crying. You know the meaning for the first cry of the child? Actually, the child is in the safest position when it is in the uterus of the mother. But on facing the external reality, the child may not cope up with the external pressure, So just for getting the oxygen, the child opens the mouth. There comes the first cry, otherwise you have to cry. But later the child learns how to use the crying as the defense mechanism to get the satisfaction of its need. In other words, we learn how to use the crying as the powerful weapon even to control our own husband or wife. Even you could have seen some people, whenever you ask something, immediately they have started crying so that you can't ask anything further. So even we use the crying as the powerful weapon throughout our life. It depends on your own family. Either you are using the crying as the powerful mechanism or your wife is using the crying as the powerful mechanism. That all depends on your family. But learning is the continuous process. That's very, very important. So from birth to death we learn. Then it is the never-ending process. Continuous process in the sense is the never-ending process. See, we have been forced to learn something in our life. Even when you are watching this CD or even when you are watching this movie, then immediately you are trying to learn something. I don't know whether you know this story. Once Gandhiji and his friend went to the play Harishchandra. Then after seeing that play, Gandhiji cried like anything when he has returned to the home. And he has taken the oath that hereafter I never tell lies in my life. This is the learning of Gandhiji from the play Harishchandra. But the Gandhiji's friend, he keep on laughing, he keep on smiling. Gandhiji had a doubt. See, what you learn from this play? Immediately he has responded that whenever there is a financial crisis, we can mortgage the wife and we can get the money. See, is it the learning? Is it the learning in the desirable direction? Absolutely it's not. But the learning depends on our perception. How do we perceive the things in the world? That is very important for our learning. If you have the real perception with the life-oriented experiences, definitely you can use the learning in a better direction. We psychologists, we mean the learning only in terms of positive sense. Gandhiji's friend's learning is not at all a learning. But Gandhiji's learning, he learns not to tell lies in the life is the important concept. See, you know what is the position Gandhiji achieved in the Indian history. Okay, but we least bother about the friend of Gandhiji. There comes the real learning, the real output of the learning. So, learning is the continuous process, it's the never-ending process. From birth to death we learn. The second quality of learning is, it is basic in nature. It's the debased behavior. See, whether we like it or not, we have been forced to attend something, we have been forced to pursue something, and we learn something in our life. For example, while watching this CD, then you may be learning some concepts. Whether you like it or not, you may be learning some concepts. That is why learning becomes the basic nature of the human being. Even if you take the animals, you can say that animals can learn something. Don't assume that only we can learn. Many a times we can infer that animals are performing better than the human being. But it should not be the case in the real life. Then learning is the universal concept. It's universal in nature. It's universal in nature. Even the person from Annamalai Nagar, he learns something. The person from Chidambaram, he learns something. Person from Kadalur, he learns something. Even the person from Africa or South Africa, he learns something. So learning is the universal concept and it becomes the important component of the human behavior. Then learning depends on our maturation. Already I mentioned that when the Leander Paes becomes the better tennis player when he grows older, because we need certain amount of physical energy for our learning. For example, if you want to concentrate on this CD, you need some energy. Only if you possess the particular energy, you can concentrate on this CD and you can learn things. Learning depends on our maturation. But maturation is not learning. Already we have discussed this point. Maturation is not at all learning. Then one more important quality of or characteristic of learning is, it is not only an acquisition of knowledge and information, but it is the capacity of an individual to adjust to the changed environmental condition. For example, as a student of psychology, you are coming from faraway places and you are sitting in this class. Even we know that it's very difficult to sit continuously in the opposite side. But you are tolerating all these things, you are tolerating the situation, you are tolerating the pollution, etc., etc. in the external environment, and still you are capable of attending the class. Which is the indication that you are capable of making necessary adjustment according to the changing environmental condition. Learning helps us to acquire some skills. and moreover learning helps us to make necessary adjustment. Here I want to mention one thing. According to B.B. Woolman, adjustment refers to the process of establishing harmonious relationship with the others as well as with the other surroundings, which means you should be in a position to make or maintain a harmonious relationship with the other people as well as with the other surroundings. From the characteristics of the learning, already we have seen that it's not only an acquisition of knowledge and information, but it's the capacity of an individual to adjust to the changed environmental condition. Then, what are the conditions which are required for learning? Number one, learning should be based on one's needs, interest and motives. When you are in need of something, you will do something, you will perform an activity. Then, only when you are interested with something, you will be attending to. Then, only when you are motivated by the particular factor, then you are working towards a particular goal. Already we have seen that learning is the goal directed behavior. So motives provide the support for the goal directed behavior, or motives initiates that goal directed behavior. Number two, individual differences should be taken into consideration for better learning. Again remember, you know that individual difference is the basic slogan of psychology. If there is no individual difference, then there is no need to study psychology at all. We know that no two individuals are alike, and we always have the inter-individual differences, like we differ in our interests, we differ in our attitude, we differ in our aptitude, we differ in our intelligence and so on. If at all we have the individual, if at all we don't have the individual differences, then we need not study psychology at all. So even for psychology, individual difference becomes the basic component. If it is the case, we should take the individual differences into account whenever we are discussing about the learning, because depending on our intelligence, depending on our motivation, depending on our goal orientation, we may learn things in a better manner. If we provide enriched environment, opportunities and facilities, we can promote the better learning. In other words, enriched environments, opportunities and facilities helps the organism to acquire new skills in their life. You have seen that learning is the important process in which we learn something in our life. Not only we are learning something in our life, we are acquiring some specific knowledge and skills in our life for the betterment of our own self. So learning always helps us to perform in a better manner, and therefore learning is always indicated through performance. Then let us discuss about the theories of learning. You know that in psychology, to explain the human behavior, psychologists adopt various theories in the field. Even you may have your own question that why we have many theories of learning. So each and every theory is valid in one aspect, and that particular aspect is adopted in the day-to-day life. Moreover, human behavior is a complex process. We cannot explain the human behavior in terms of simply only one theory. We have to accept many theories in psychology, and also psychologists have proposed many theories of learning. One such important theory is classical conditioning by Pavlov, a Russian psychologist. Pavlov basically was not a psychologist, he was the human physiologist. He won the Nobel Prize in the year 1904, but still he is recognized for his contribution in the field of psychology rather than in the field of physiology. Actually, Pavlov done the experiment with a dog. He wants to study the segregation of stomach acid and salivation in dogs in response to the ingestion of varying amounts and kinds of food. It was observed by Pavlov that sometimes stomach segregations and salivation would begin when no food had actually been eaten. Even the mere sight of a food bowl, or the individual who normally brought the food, or even the sound of that individual's footsteps were enough to produce a physiological response in the dog. He learned the phenomena classical conditioning only from this accident. Dogs not only respond on the basis of a biological need, that is hunger, but also as a result of learning or pairing. This is called as classical conditioning by Pavlov. In classical conditioning, an organism learns to respond to a neutral stimulus that normally does not bring that response. In other words, the dog learns to salivate even for the footstep. Later, Pavlov has continued his experiment with many other manner, and he has repeated the experiment with many different dogs, and he has established the classical conditioning from his experiences. We can write the classical conditioning with the following three equations. The first one is unconditional stimulus, the meat powder elicits the unconditional response, salivation. The second one is the neutral stimulus, the sound of your tuning fork, plus the unconditioned stimulus, the meat powder, elicits the unconditioned response, that is salivation. Due to the pairing or association, the previously unconditioned stimulus, that is the bell sound, now elicits the response, now becomes the conditioned stimulus, CS, which elicits the conditioned response, that is salivation. We can discuss the three equations as follows. See, when the meat powder is presented, the dog salivates. This is the response for the natural stimulus. Meat powder is the natural stimulus. Even on seeing the chicken piece, you are salivating. So, meat powder is the natural stimulus for which the dog salivates. It's the natural response. Then, when you pair the sound of the tuning fork with this natural stimulus, that is, before presenting the meat powder, just you are presenting the sound of your tuning fork, then you have presented the meat powder. Now also the dog salivates. This is the unconditioned response. Due to the pairing or association, the dog salivates even for the bell sound. In other words, the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus, which elicits the response, the same response, salivation, but in this case the response becomes the conditioned response. Pavlov proposed the classical conditioning as the organism learns to respond to a neutral stimulus that normally does not bring the change. We can apply same principle in all our life. In most of the life situation, we learn only through classical conditioning. For example, just we threaten the child on saying the name doctor, I will take you to the doctor. Immediately the child associates the doctor with the injection, and the child gets the fear and stops crying. Or whenever you want to leave the child in the house with the other family members, immediately you are stating that I am going to the clinic of a particular doctor, because we have already created the fear with the injection, that needle which creates the pain. So through association we learn in our childhood level, but we can't say that all the adults are learning only using the classical conditioning. We use the operant conditioning, and we can discuss about the operant conditioning in the other lesson. Although initial experiments in the field of classical conditioning were done with the animals, but we can apply these principles to the human behavior. For example, most of our emotional responses are learned through classical conditioning, and you can see that many people have developed the fear about mice, spiders, etc., though they are typically harmless. This is just because of the classical conditioning. Even you could have the fear about the cockroach in your home. These are out of the classical conditioning, and which provides the idea that we can use the association or the principle of association to learn the fears. See, once if it is possible for us to learn the things through the association, it's definitely possible for us to unlearn the things. Though the unlearning is the difficult process, but still using the same association principle we can unlearn the things. First we should discuss about the important reactions of the classical conditioning. The first one is acquisition. See, in the Pavlov's experiment, the dog learns how to salivate for the bell sound. That is nothing but acquisition. The dog learns how to salivate even for the bell sound. This process is called as acquisition. Similarly, out of our association, we learn many things in our life. Number 2, extinction. In the same Pavlov's experiment, whenever the dog salivates, then the meat powder was provided. If you didn't provide the meat powder, initially the dog may salivate for the sound of your tuning fork, but after some time the dog may stop salivation for the sound of the tuning fork. Still, the important thing is the dog forgets how to salivate for the particular bell sound, but we can help the dog to recover the particular behavior with the help of few trials. So initially, if the dog takes more time for salivation with the bell sound, now due to the previous exposure, within few trials or within few minutes you can bring the same behavior with the dog, which is termed as spontaneous recovery. The generalization and discrimination is also possible with the classical conditioning. For example, Paulo has used the bell sound. Even you can use various sounds for the salivation of the dog, or even we are responding to many stimulus and we are capable of generalizing those stimulus and we are responding to those stimuli. We are capable of discriminating the different stimulus also. Even in the Paulo's experiment, the dog differentiate the bell sound from the sound of the footstep. So similarly, we are capable of discriminating these stimuli in the day-to-day life. And one more thing is second order conditioning. So in the Paulo's experiment, he has repeated the experiment not only with the bell sound or tuning fork sound. Before presenting the tuning fork sound, he has paired the light. Then first he has switched on the light, then he has provided the tuning fork sound, then he has provided the meat powder, the dog salivates. Due to the association, later the dog learns even how to salivate when we switch on the light. This is called as second order conditioning. In other words, in the day-to-day life, depending on our past experiences, we are making inferences about other people. This is a kind of second order conditioning. So just because of our experiences, just because based on our experiences, we are associating our experiences to evaluate or adjudicate the other person as good or bad only from the experiences. Then what are the applications of this classical conditioning? Number one, you can remove the fears by applying the systematic desensitization procedure. Again, you will be discussing the systematic desensitization in detail in your psychotherapeutics. Still, systematic desensitization involves the principle of classical conditioning. Wrong patterns of behavior can be broken by deconditioning, and good habits can be developed by conditioning. And moreover, we can use this type of classical conditioning to improve the classroom climate. Teachers and the parents, we can apply this classical conditioning in all walks of life. In this lesson, we have started with the meaning of learning. Then we have discussed about the definition of learning. We have discussed about the process of learning and characteristics of learning. Then we have started with the important theory called classical conditioning, and we have seen the process of classical conditioning. Let us discuss about the operant conditioning in the next lesson. Bye bye. All the best.